May morning briefing hosted by the Mount Vernon Lee Chamber of Commerce. My name is Mark Murray. I'm the chairman of the chamber. I'm also CEO of the Fort Belvoir swim team, president of Mount Vernon Pool Service, and I'm a realtor with Coldwell Banker in Old Town Alexandria. With things opening back up, there's some new optimism in the community. The chamber will be offering in-person events soon, so be alert for announcements. The morning briefings are on the third Thursday of each month, and we hope to return to in-person meetings soon. The General Assembly report is an annual program that provides an informal way to understand the new laws passed in the last session. We welcome our state senators and delegates who've joined us, and they will be introduced shortly. As we begin, we'd like to recognize the Chamber's strategic partners. These are businesses that support the Chamber on a higher level, and we appreciate their contribution to our success. Those participating in the meeting today are Don Camerata of Covanta Fairfax, Kevin McNulty with Cox Communications, Joel Bernstein, ECCA Payroll, Melissa Riddy of Inova Mount Vernon Hospital, and Daniel Renzel of Redmond, Payton, and Braswell LLP, full service law firm. Have I missed anybody? Who's our strategic partners that's on today? Okay, good. All right, here's some upcoming chamber events so you can get these on your calendar. Registration for events is on the website. On May 25th, there'll be a reception to award our 2021 business scholarships on Tuesday, May 25th at 6 p.m. at the Fairfax. This is a free networking event for members and should be a great way to start reconnecting. The Chamber has awarded more than $250,000 in scholarships to develop the next generation of business and community leaders. On June 17th, the morning briefing is the Army Museum at Fort Belvoir. It's an amazing place if you haven't been there yet. You can also find out more about committee meetings, lead share groups, and Senior Resource Council on the website. Today's meeting is hosted by the Chamber's Legislative Affairs Committee Chair. This is a very active committee chaired by Kevin McNulty with Cox Communications. The committee works hard to promote pro-business policies at all levels of government. Kevin, please take over.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone. We're fortunate to be joined by most of our delegation, and I would say that we are very lucky that we have a very effective and influential state delegation. I don't think you could look around the state and find a more effective delegation than we have along the Route 1 corridor, Mount Vernon Lee. So thank you for joining us this morning. We're joined by Senator George Barker, Delegate Mark Sickles, Delegate Kathy Tran, and on the phone who will be joining us soon on screen is Senator Scott Soroville. So thank you for your time this morning. I know that I think it's a little bit of a unique situation, similar to last year in the sense that we're going to be talking about what happened during the regular General Assembly session, and then also what's going to be happening during the upcoming special session, which is likely to occur later on this summer. I think everyone's favorite thing to talk about is money, and we're lucky to have two members of the budget conference that are here with us this morning. So Senator Barker, I'll start off with you if you want to give us some highlights of what was included in the budget bill this year, particularly anything that impacts small business here in Virginia, and any other notable items you want to include, and then I'll turn it over to Delegate Sickles as well for his thoughts, because I know you both were very instrumental in that process.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was. I just put in a budget amendment, and it's good to be in the majority, and it's good to be senior. It's good to be on the budget conference. So there wasn't that much strategy. I just, when we got to the Senate, I don't know, and I'm not talking about anyone on this line, there was a little bit of opposition, or said, Mark, how much do you really need? I said, we need $5 million. And as you recall, way back when the dark ages in the last 2-year budget, the governor had $5 million in it. The Senate cut it to $1 million because I don't know why they didn't like the governor's proposal or whatever. And we'd gotten it up to 3 million in the conference committee then, and then it was unallotted due to the COVID crisis. And so now that we were back this year with our second year, and we're in good financial shape, very good financial shape. And we also have, as you'll probably hear as a theme today, a proclivity to look for one-time projects, one-time expenditures, one-time investments that don't create an ongoing obligation. I'm not saying we're going to stick to that completely and totally with everything that's coming at us now. But when we got to the budget conference and with George was there, and we just decided to take the House position. I had a little bit of support from our chairman, Luke Torian, and they promised me not to ask for any next year. I said, okay. So that's how, and then we moved on to the next thing. So it was no great intrigue to it. It would have been about as opposite from Medicaid expansion and what we went through to get that passed to this as it could be. But I'm happy that, you know, I'm living long enough. I'm still here to be in a position to do something like that for Northern Virginia. And the 2 projects that you probably heard briefed on, if anyone hasn't heard, are both of them outdoors. One of them is a memorial garden. One of them is an entrance plaza. Since they've shaped up the outside, it is beautiful over there before you even go into the museum. And these projects are going to enhance that part of it and enhance their activities that they're planning to do on the outside on the parade field, and just make the site that much more valuable and special. So just happy to be able to do that. You know, what else was that's one little issue. There was a lot of things that happened this year, and all, you know, our various sessions that we had, and getting through this and making sure that we had proper response to COVID. You know, my staff and I worked hard on the preparations for the mass vaccinations. We got sent a bill from the Senate that was like a 1-sentence bill, and we spent a lot of time working with all the various people that are involved in it now. I mean, the physician community, the hospitals, particularly, and other entities, making this mass vaccination process that we're in now work well. So there's a lot of that I worked on in healthcare. If you want me to talk about that now, I can. If you want to ask me another question, because I'll just keep rolling here.
Let's see if Senator Barker is back on audio.
Okay.
You hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. So
All right.
Delegate
I had to
Sickles
go
was
close
talking
out
about,
and come back in, so.
yeah, some of the things that he worked on with the budget. I know as a budget conferee, you also have a lot of influence. And one thing that this chamber supported throughout the session was PPP deductibility. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and how that was included in the budget, and any other highlights that we should know about.
Yeah, actually, I chaired a subcommittee that dealt with that issue in the Senate Finance Committee and Commerce and Labor Committee. And we went very carefully through all the issues as it related to the PPP deductibility that had been opposed initially by the Trump administration at the federal level. And then when the Congress got involved in December, and with Mark Warner very actively leading a lot of that effort, they put it back in as full deductibility in terms of the federal provisions. But we already had the budget that had been submitted by Governor Northam that did not have any deductibility on it. So we took up the issue and decided to deal with it. What we ended up doing in the Senate, and I worked closely with Janet Howell and Steve Newman and a couple of others on that, both Republicans and Democrats, And what we ended up doing is putting in deductibility for up to 100,000, which is about the average or the median of the loans that were provided there. It was not in the House budget, but when we sat down in the conference committee, we quickly, just as Delegate Sickles had talked about related to the Fort Belvoir, the Army thing, sometimes the Senate goes along with what the House position is. In this case, the House went along with what the Senate said.
Well,
And so we
I
got the
think
full $100,000 that was to be able to do that.
We had 25,000
Yeah.
deductibility,
Right.
not zero.
And so-
because we were opposed to double dipping. But go ahead.
And so anyway, in the end, we did do the full, the $100,000, which is what we did in the Senate budget. So I think it is going to be very helpful. It is now very helpful to a lot of the smaller businesses around the Commonwealth who've had some difficulties. And, you know, part of what we heard from, you know, among the people we heard from were a lot of small businesses who had intentionally kept their employees on the payroll, even if there wasn't much for the employees to be able, some of the employees to be able to do during parts of the pandemic period. But they made a commitment to their employees to do that, and we felt that they should have this benefit up to the $100,000 level to be able to reward them for that and be able to help them stay in business. One of the things we wanted to do was to make sure that we were rewarding those businesses who had helped their employees in this way and kept them on the payroll. And now a lot of them are back working a good bit now. But also what we wanted to do was to try to make sure that these small businesses could make it through the rest of the pandemic period. And we wanted to make sure that, that the absence of this deductibility would not put them in a position where they would not be able to make it through the rest of the pandemic period here. We've had about a quarter of the businesses statewide have gone out of business during this period, and we felt that was more than enough. And we didn't want to do what we could to make sure that others did not go out of business. So we did that. We also dealt with a couple of other things, trying to make sure that we were not coming down too harsh on a lot of the small businesses around. We had a bill that came over from the House dealing with, I guess it was, I think it was sick leave there, making sure that, trying to make sure that employees would have sick leave benefits. We felt that this was not the time in the Senate. We felt this was not the time to, in effect, impose that on small businesses. Some of whom, many of whom provide sick leave, but some of whom don't. And we didn't want to, in effect, put them in a position where that would be an additional expense for some of those and might also force them out of business, which is not what we wanted to see. So actually what we came up with was, I think, a good approach in that we provided sick leave benefits for the individuals that the state is responsible for providing care for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, the elderly in their homes, and a lot of those types of things. So we have provided that for public employees in some limited categories, particularly related to some of the issues we've dealt with during the pandemic period. But we did not impose that on any of the private sector businesses there. And then Delegate Sickles had a great bill, like all his bills are, and on reinsurance to try to help bring down the cost of health insurance. And what we did in the end was say that we're not going to increase somebody else's health insurance costs to be able to help people who are on the exchange be able to get cheaper things. And so we're putting up the money ourselves at the state level to buy down the cost of health insurance for people who are on the individual market and the health insurance exchange. So we were trying to be sensitive to the needs of businesses across the Commonwealth, and particularly during this time when there's been a lot of turmoil economically, and a lot of businesses have had really a challenging period of time over the last 15 months now, and we want to help those businesses get back to thriving operations. So we were pleased to do that, and I think it ended up working out very well on those things. One other thing that I was asked to talk about was where what a bill that I had in. I had 12 bills in, 11 passed, but one did get killed. And that bill was one that was similar to a bill I'd had last year. and it was to provide opportunity for realtors to collectively get a health insurance plan. Realtors, because of the nature of how they're paid and everything, they're not, by and large, they're not employees of the real estate companies. They work on a commission basis. They're 1099 employees, and so therefore, the businesses, are not in a position to be able to provide their health insurance coverage there because they're not regular employees of the realtors, the real estate agencies. We have actually a situation where we've been helping a lot of people get health insurance coverage, but among realtors, we still have 20% of the realtors don't have health insurance coverage, which seems to me, particularly for a profession where you have mostly middle class, upper middle class people providing real estate services, that's inexcusable, and we should try to do what we can to be able to make sure that they get coverage. So working with the State Realtors Association, we came up with a bill that would allow the members of the State Realtors Association to work with insurance companies to develop an insurance plan, a coverage plan for the realtors statewide to be able to help him get that coverage. And I hear a lot from real estate people who are involved in real estate that this is a big issue for a lot of realtors. So we're trying to get that done. I thought we had a great plan. It was consistent with all the provisions of the Affordable Care Act, so it was not a cheap plan. And in fact, the realtor said we wouldn't want a cheap plan. And they said we want a comprehensive plan to be able to give us good quality health coverage. So I thought we had everything in place, but in the end, the governor ended up opposing it, and I guess worked with some leadership in the House, and the word went down to send it to the Joint Commission on Healthcare to have it studied for the year. Delegate Sickles and I are both on the Joint Commission on Healthcare, and so we will be involved in that review of it this year. And I'm highly optimistic. I've already committed. Actually, I committed the day that the bill got killed to bring it back next year. So we're going to bring it back next year, and I'm working with the realtors on that process, and we'll do it. And reaching out to some people who might be in office next year in January to see whether we can get commitments on that upfront on things. So I think that we are in a good position to do that. And I was just very disappointed that it did not happen this year. We almost got it last year. Last year, we'd actually used a parliamentary maneuver to be able to go around the governor to get it implemented in the Senate, but we didn't have quite enough votes in the House to be able to get it done. So it didn't. The governor vetoed it last year.
Thank you, Senator. I know there's a lot of realtors in our Chamber of Commerce, and that's definitely something of interest.
Yeah.
Tren, I know so far in your time in the House, you've been a leader in workforce issues and had an interesting bill this year, the Virginia Initiative for Education and Work. Can you talk to us about that bill and how you think it encourages people to begin participating in?
Sure. Good morning. I hope everybody is doing well. I'm just going to pull up some of my notes. But I'm Kathy Tran, and I serve parts of Southeast and Southern Fairfax County in the House of Delegates in the 42nd District. I'm always a little bit short, so I feel like my name on Zoom always covers up half my face. But I'm really glad to be with you today. And we worked with the administration on this particular bill, and it helps to provide TANF recipients, so individuals who are on welfare, with subsidized employment opportunities. And I think what's really important about this is subsidized employment is a proven model to help particularly vulnerable individuals who might not have the training, the skills, or the workforce experience to be able to gain that on-site experience and then be able to transition over into competitive job opportunities. And so essentially helping them to come off of TANF and get competitive job opportunities. And so what we did was increase the subsidy that employers are able to receive up to $1,000 for we increased it from $300 to $1,000 for up to 6 months, so that if you bring on somebody who is currently on TANF, you can get this subsidy. So it helps employers be able to access a workforce as well. And I think particularly as we're recovering from a pandemic and we want to make sure nobody is left behind, right? Some of our most vulnerable individuals are going to be competing for jobs, and we want to make sure they also have the work experience to compete as well as the economy enters into a recovery period. So I'm really excited about that. And the hope is that there will be more employers who participate and being able to bring on more TANF recipients into this aspect of the program. And we also, just a reminder that the TANF program is a federal program, and these the resources that will be used to fund this new increase in the subsidized employment is paid for through that federal grant.
Excellent, thank you. I think it's a really unique way to encourage people that might not have the incentive to participate, to really get them in the workforce and up on their feet. So that's wonderful. Delegate Sickles, you mentioned your chairmanship of the HWI committee, and I know that was a very busy committee this year. So we'd love to hear what took place and learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah. We deal with a lot of inside baseball, healthcare profession issues and conflicts between the various professions. We had some of that this year. We were able to pass legislation to give advanced practice nurses a little bit more authority. The governor had reduced right now to practice independently. This is just an example of many things, but you have to be with a practice for 5 years. During the pandemic, the governor reduced that to 2, and we were working on making that permanent. Also, we changed the licensing procedures, or made them uniform for being a midwife, the practice of midwifery, and created a degree that you can get in that, and to line it up with other programs. It's in the weeds, and I can't really explain it, but I think it's pro midwife, and so we had some other legislation on how midwives can practice, separate bill, how they can practice independently. We had bills, and Delegate Tran had one to help families with disabled children to navigate the process better and have people be able to go into a hospital situation, even in the pandemic when they needed help. We had a lot of issues with regard to access to healthcare facilities during the middle of the pandemic. We dealt with some of that. The bigger issues are really the funding of these items in the appropriation side. And if you run a nursing home, you might like us a little bit better, because they had a huge crisis, and we were able to give $20, which is matched by $20 from the federal government for each patient in a nursing home. They had to, these businessmen had to go from double occupancy rooms in some cases to single occupancy. There's no congregate eating anymore, so every meal has to be delivered to the room. So their costs went way up, and so we are right in the middle now of studying at the Joint Commission on Healthcare our future workforce issues with regard to long-term care employees, and trying to make careers attractive. And there's certain type of people who really love this person-to-person care, and we need to reward that and keep them from having to have 2 of these jobs. You read a lot in the paper about people that would go from one nursing home to the next nursing home. So we're going to roots right now. We had a testimony on it this week, just earlier this week, in our initial JLARC is studying, the Joint Commission is studying long-term care. So our oversight committee that Senator Barker and I chair and co-chair of the money committees is looking into this, and we're looking into value. We passed some language that would implement value-based purchasing for long-term healthcare services, and so that would be a transition to upping the game with regard to nursing home care. There are some states like Oregon that don't have nursing homes at all. I mean, it's kind of a model that we have institutions, and we want to, because your family wants this too, to stay in your home as long as possible. We're doing a little bit better job of that, but we need to do a lot better job of that as we go into the future, it's oftentimes less expensive and a better experience. So those are a couple things. We are, Senator Barker mentioned reinsurance. That is a long-term, not long-term, but that will help the same population that his really good realtor association plan bill is. I mean, I feel for him and as much work as he put into that not to be able to get it over the finish line. But the reinsurance, the purpose of that is to get the individual rates, premiums in the individual market down by taking people after they reach a certain threshold of expenses in a year, they transfer their reimbursement to a different fund. It has the effect of lowering premiums for by allowing the insurance companies to limit their risk. So that won't be in effect though until the year 2024. The way it works, it's going to be eased in. So we're paying for it with general funds. And so hopefully the governor, as he leaves us a new budget in December, in the second year of that 2-year budget coming up in December, we'll be funding to pay our share of the federal state partnership to reduce these premiums. There's a lot of change that could happen. It's been talked about at the federal level with regard to healthcare.gov. We are going to a state-based exchange, something that happened last year. We're working towards, but things have changed. Like there's an increase now during the pandemic to 600% of the federal poverty level to be eligible for subsidies. Right now, that's 400%. The Biden administration is trying to make that permanent. And so having deeper subsidies for lower income workers that don't have employer-based insurance, it's going to be helpful in getting more people with insurance. So we are trying to do everything we can to get everybody a healthcare home where there's somebody, when they go into a provider, there's some payer out there. And, we don't have that. And we've grown up with this hodgepodge system where there's in the healthcare where cross subsidies rule the day. You pay $10 for an aspirin, $5 an aspirin in a hospital for a reason there. And so because we've been paying for so many people uncompensated, providers are not compensated for it. So we're trying to change that and move toward more a healthcare home for everyone, as I said. So there are many activities going on in the healthcare space, and hopefully you consider them pro-business because they're intended to get everybody coverage, make the pool bigger, and then your individual costs less instead of you having to pay for someone else's insurance.
We have a large population of assisted living and nursing facilities as members. That's something of great interest to us. I think everyone can see on the screen that Senator Sherville has joined us. You were involved in some high-profile legislation this session. I know one that you particularly carried on the Senate side created a pathway for expungement for certain offenses. We'd love to hear your thoughts on how helping people get back into the workforce is good for business.
Hey, Kevin, thanks. And thanks for tap dancing for me so I get out of my car. Appreciate that. But it's good to be here with everybody. I look forward to being back in Bellhaven Country Club, where I used to work in high school at the tennis shop one of these days. But yeah, the expungement bill was a real knockdown, drag out of a fight negotiation. We've been trying to, first of all, Virginia's laws on that are just archaic. We are one of 8 states in America that does not allow people to seal misdemeanor convictions. We're one of 16 states that does not allow any kind of sealing of felony convictions. So we're like way out of the mainstream when it comes to the rest of the country on giving people second chances post conviction. We do allow it for dismissals, but not for convictions. So basically the dispute between the House and the Senate had to do with whether or not the process ought to be automatic or whether it ought to be petition based, and Commonwealth's attorneys and judges ought to have discretion in deciding whether a charge should be sealed. The Senate always supported some kind of an automatic program. We just didn't support one that was as broad as what the House wanted to do. And so we ended up working out a compromise where we ended up agreeing to sealing off of 9 separate misdemeanors, one of which was marijuana possession, which kind of became irrelevant later in the session. But the others were petty larceny and various forms of trespassing and underage alcohol possession and possession of fake ID. Those will all be automatically sealed, not expunged, but sealed after a 7-year period of good behavior. The other part of the bill creates a petition-based sealing process for any other type of misdemeanor except DUI and domestic violence. There's no way to seal DUI or domestic violence under this bill. And any class 5 or 6 felonies and a couple undefined felonies like grand larceny. So you'll be able to petition a court to get a charge sealed. You're only allowed to do that though twice for 2 sets of charges in your lifetime. And the waiting period is at 10 years. You have to show 10 years of good behavior, no criminal violations whatsoever before you can apply to have those offenses sealed. And if you have a class 3 or 4 felony conviction, you have to wait 20 years. 20 years before you can get the class 5 or 6 felony or the misdemeanor sealed. And the difference between sealing and expungement is that sealing will allow certain employers who hire people for certain sensitive positions to actually be able to look past the ceiling to see convictions. And so, for example, people that they're in sensitive positions, for example, dealing with children or people in a vulnerable situation, like people in a hospital bed, or you have access to people's dwellings. If you're a building engineer or something, you have a master key to a building. If you're applying for a job that requires a federal security clearance, something like that, you'll be able to ask the state police, if you show it's a qualified job, to look behind that to seal charges so that you don't end up hiring somebody that flunks the security clearance or somebody that has a history that could give you pause. But basically what the bill is designed to do is to open up employment opportunities to a lot more people, because 1.6 million Virginians have criminal histories out of 8.4 million people that live in our state. And you remember a good chunk of those are children, right? I mean, probably about 2 million people of the 8 million in our state are children. So 1.6 million of the remaining 6 million have criminal histories. And that creates significant barriers to people for employment, for access to housing. There's a lot of landlords that will not rent to anybody who has any kind of conviction or recent conviction on the record. It creates barriers to insurance. And what this does, it opens up the workforce to a lot more people. And remember, all this bill does is gets Virginia into the mainstream with the rest of the country. As I said, we're one of only 8 states on misdemeanors, one of 16 on felonies that don't allow this. And so this gets us up to where everybody else is. Also, if you successfully petition to have an offense sealed, the statute also says that conviction no longer serves as a barrier to obtaining a license or certificate prohibited by state law to engage in a certain profession. So, for example, there's some very low level felonies that can prohibit you from being like an ABC manager. And so if you can get that sealed, you can show to a judge, you rehabilitate yourself, you're no longer addicted to alcohol, you've been a good behavior, get that sealed, then you go be an ABC manager. So, or you can go obtain other kinds of state licenses. It's amazing how many types of barriers there are out there. But this, and also, by the way, this bill is not effective for 4 years. The budget writers came, or the budget predictor and prognosticators came to us and said that if we implemented this bill without any changes, it was going to cost taxpayers about $70 to $80 million a year to implement because of all the human manpower involved. And so it's going to take about 4 years to get the computers up to speed to automate all this processes. So none of this actually goes into effect until July 1 of 2025. So we'll have plenty of time to adjust and figure it out. And DCJS, the state police, are going to write some regulations, creating, for example, a list of all the different jobs that people can go around the ceiling and ask to look at somebody's history. So if you think, for example, there's positions that you're hiring for that's really important that you be able to look, you need to stay tuned to make sure you voice in on those when those regulations are written. That's basically what that bill did, Kevin.
Excellent, thank you. I know you just talked about access to housing and delegate training. That's something that you worked on this year, particularly in regard to military spouses. And obviously with Fort Belvoir and just the large military presence we have in our community, that's something that's really critical. So I'd love to hear about that.
Kevin, thank you so much. I'm very, very stoked about this bill. And what this bill does is extend anti-discrimination protections for service members, military spouses, and some of their dependents in the areas of employment, housing, and public accommodations, which is the same set of anti-discrimination protections we have for other protected groups already. And we had them through the Equality Act last year. We were kind of still defining veterans, but we didn't have them for other members of the military family. And it came about in a couple of ways, but I want to highlight why it's really important here in Virginia. One is the issue that military spouses face in their careers, and as they are moving from place to place and trying to advance in their careers, so many spouses face employment discrimination. And it was actually an email that a cousin of mine shared with me. She's in the Navy. She just moved into the district, but she's in the Navy, where a spouse said, hey, can somebody help me with this? And the letter they got from an employer was, in 2020, a letter from the employer was, I would, love to hire you, but when the owner found out that you are military affiliated, it was a no-go from the start, right? And so this bill ends kind of outright employment discrimination against military spouses. And we had the support of so many different chambers across Virginia on this bill. We're really, really excited about it for that aspect. And then the other piece is around housing. And what I learned through the process was, as I was talking to stakeholders, was that there were many landlords in Virginia who were actively being encouraged to ask service members to waive their housing protections under the Service Member Civil Relief Act, which is a federal law that grants certain consumer protections for military service members. And part of that is related to when they could break a lease if they were called into duty or had to quickly PCS and things like that. And so landlords were being encouraged to ask service members to waive those rights as a condition of getting their lease. And so just kind of really technically, you could waive those rights. You could choose to do so as an individual, but we felt like it was not right to ask somebody to waive those rights in order to get a lease. It's as if saying to somebody who has a disability, you must waive all of your federal protections under the American with Disabilities Act in order to get employment in Virginia, right? We would never do that. And so we had actually service members in the Hampton Roads area who were experiencing this issue as they were getting a lease, like during earlier this year, come forward to share their experience. And so I think that part was actually the harder part to work through with some of the stakeholders, but I think we were frankly able to muscle that through at the end of the day. And I'm really, really proud of that. And so that's affected, service members throughout Virginia, not just in Hampton Roads, not just in our area with Fort Belvoir, but it's being able to say, hey, I have these protections. I should be able to get my lease without waiving them. And it's been so difficult right now with just the way the housing market is for some of our military families to get off-base housing. And so I think I'm hopeful that this will help to alleviate a portion of those concerns that some of our families are facing.
Excellent, thank you. So I know I mentioned at the beginning that we have another session coming up at a to be determined time. So we'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on what the expectations are going to be, but did want to invite people to jump in and ask any questions you may have, and maybe we can finish with the expectations for the special session. And Senator Servo, we're not going to let you off the hook. Hopefully we have enough time to hear about the marijuana legalization and what to expect of that going forward. Marijuana legalization has been a hot topic for our chamber, particularly about how the resale sales are going to be incorporated. And I know there's some work that has to be done on that going forward, but there's just been a lot of concern around, what that would look like for Route 1 and how it could impact.
Hey, Kevin. So yeah, I'm sorry Paul's not on here because Paul actually put a lot of work into this bill as the subcommittee chairman on general laws that handled this bill when it came through. He wasn't on the conference committee, but he put a lot of work into it. He knows this issue stone cold as well. But the press that came out of this bill was like a mess because it completely incorrectly described what was actually happening. Okay. The only thing that we did this session was we legalized the possession of small amounts by adults in certain circumstances. And then we also legalized the ability to grow 4 plants at home. So you're not allowed to smoke in public. All right. It's just like alcohol. You can't smoke in public. You can't smoke, anywhere. You can't drink alcohol. You're not allowed to have an open container in your car. You can't possess marijuana on school property, in a school bus. If you have a CDL, you can't have any in your bloodstream. So it's exactly like alcohol. You also have to be an adult to have it. Unlike alcohol, there's no exceptions for juvenile possession, right? With alcohol, juveniles can possess if they're with their parents. They can consume with their parents, not marijuana. So none of that got picked up by the media. And actually, the bill has absolutely nothing that became law in it about retail sales, manufacturing, or growing by for money. There's pieces in the bill, but they all have to be voted on again to become law. They all had a reenactment clause on it. So there's a lot of talk about what the bill had in it, but the way the Senate saw all those provisions was that was just a rough draft and it didn't mean anything because we had to vote on it again because the complexity associated with those issues was such a mess. We didn't think we had nearly enough time to vet that during session. And so we never actually really passed judgment on any of that. But the issues that we have to face are, first of all, we're probably going to go with a three-tiered system, just like we do with alcohol, to a lesser extent, cars and other products. That is, you have to have separation of ownership between who grows it, who manufactures it, and then who sells it. And so we have to decide how much integration we allow vertically, if at all. Do we allow the same company to grow and manufacture or to manufacture and sell? Or do you have to buy separately like you do with alcohol right now, right? Budweiser can't tell the bar what beer they have to carry. They have to coordinate with a beer distributor to do that, which is usually locally owned and, for example, a member of your chamber. So same thing with automobiles, right? So we have to decide how much vertical integration to allow. We also have to decide how much horizontal integration to allow because we just set up this whole medical marijuana system already, which just got stood up. And we have to decide, are we going to let any of those medical guys play in the retail space? Or alternatively, there's also these people that grow hemp. We legalized hemp about 4 or 5 years ago. We have to decide, we're going to let any of the hemp growers also grow marijuana. And that's not a simple thing because bees like to carry pollen on their tendrils between plants. And if they take marijuana pollen and put it on hemp pollen, they'll make the hemp have too much THC in it, or what they call grow hot, and spoil the crop. So we have to get through a lot of these technical issues to try and figure out how to get all this done. And wrapped up in all of this is there's a real strong push to consider equity within the system. That is to encourage ownership and the growth of capital in communities that have been historically punished due to the use of marijuana in an equitable fashion. So there's talk about setting aside a certain number of licenses for example, people who have prior convictions for marijuana distribution, or there's discussion about targeting licenses in areas where there's been disproportionate prosecution. And the reason that we have to frame it that way is because the government, thanks to recent US Supreme Court decisions, has made very clear that the government cannot make distinctions based on race without very, very, very strong justifications, right? You can't, and just like, you can't say certain races can't have things, you also can't say certain races can have things. And that's due to the recent, the recent precedent of the US Supreme Court. The Chief Justice, John Roberts, has been very clear that he thinks racism is not a problem anymore. And therefore the government, has been very hostile towards affirmative action programs. And so if you're going to try to target programs in these ways, you have to come up with creative ways to be able to target it without making classifications based on race. And so these are some of the very thorny legal issues that we have to navigate to create this system, in addition to just the business issues we talked about. We also have to figure out how to tax it, how to regulate it. Because of current federal law, none of these businesses are allowed to have bank accounts. So, how do you figure out what they're, what they're really selling or not when they're all dealing in cash, right? So, all I can tell you, Kevin, is that we have a lot of discussions left to have on this. I know we talked about putting together a possibly joint committee of general laws, courts of justice, and finance, meeting with the House at the same time to try and talk through some of these issues. But one of the other things we did do, by the way, is we did stand up the Cannabis Control Authority, the regulatory entity. We did decide we're not going to put it in ABC. We're going to have a separate authority. And that authority goes live July 1. And there are going to be 3 boards under that body. And that body is going to be there to assist us in developing these statutes and these regulations to help us in these discussions. But we have a lot to figure out on this still. And as you can tell from what I said, we didn't have time in 45 days to work through all that. And the governor really only started the discussions before session about 3 months before that. And there's no state that's been able to do this in 5 months. It usually takes about 1 or 2 years to work through all the issues to come up with a workable system. And so that's why, that's kind of where we are right now. We have a ways to go, and I can appreciate the sensitivity and the concern about how it could affect the business climate and the climate in our community. But I think at the end of the day, it's gonna be net positive, because this marijuana for too long has just been sort of used as a way to get a lot of people into the criminal justice system. From my perspective, I mean, it's been great for my law practice, but it hasn't been great for a lot of people's lives. I mean, if you look at the usage rates, blacks and whites use marijuana at the exact same rates, but blacks end up in the legal system about 4 or 5 times more frequently than whites do. And so it clearly hasn't been applied in a fair fashion. And when you go back and look at things like, example, my expungement bill, I mean, I've had people call me who've had marijuana charges that are like 10, 15, 20 years old. They haven't been able to get a job, certain jobs they want to get because of that one conviction. I had a nurse that called me the other day who had a conviction, and she had been a registered nurse and hasn't been able to get clear background check now because of that. So, I'm optimistic we can work it out next session, but it's going to be there's a lot to work through.
Thank you. That's a helpful overview. And as I mentioned, so there's another session that's coming up, and recently the governor and leadership in the House and Senate put out a statement about how to priorities for spending the over $4 billion that are coming to Virginia. So Delegate Sickles and Senator Barker would love to hear your thoughts on that. And I know we're getting short on time, but if anyone does have additional questions, please jump in. So Delegate Sickles, if you want to.
I have one thing that you might be interested as an employee of Cox, but we've got $50 million now, I believe, into broadband deployment, and we have preferred to do it in partnership with your industry, and that has kind of worked well. So my question for you is, since we're going to have, this is our chance to bring broadband to every corner. Conceivably, we're going to have enough money. What is the industry's capacity to do this? Does industry have a plan that if we put another 100 million into it, from our public-private partnership standpoint, can we get broadband to every part of Virginia? I'm going to ask you, turn it around on you.
I saw you ask a similar question to the Secretary of Finance on Monday.
I didn't like his answer. I need a better answer.
Yeah, I think that that we will wrap up as quickly as possible, but I think there's a growing concern among industry that this money is not just being deployed to Virginia; it's being deployed across the country, and it's going to be very challenging, to build out in 18 months just because of the shortage of labor. Now, we just worked with Roanoke County on a project that's a $2.5 million build, which was, we were very happy to partner with them on the project. But right now we're making a concerted effort to make sure that we have the workers to work on that project. So it will definitely be a concern.
Yeah.
Is that with all the money that you've invested over the past 2 years, there's very few areas of the Commonwealth at this point that are unserved. So there's so much money coming in for broadband, and I don't know, it's probably more than we need, frankly.
Okay, that's interesting to know.
Hey, Kevin.
So I mentioned earlier, like we're looking for one-time expenditures, capital expenditures where we can. Some of they're waiting for guidance from many of the different agencies on how they can spend it. We know on the school money, we can't build a new school with the rescue plan money. We can put a new HVAC system on, possibly put a new roof on the school. But we're not, there's a need that we hear about a lot across the state for deteriorating school buildings, school infrastructure. That I think we're going to have a lot of new HVAC systems across the Commonwealth and every rural hamlet that's out there. But that's still a big political issue. Right now, the state we don't pay our teachers enough, for example. Just getting our standards of quality up would be helpful. Fairfax County's school system provides a K-12 education that goes far beyond the state standard of quality. If we up our game on that, it's hundreds of millions of dollars, and of course that includes we need paying people a competitive rate. And so I'm hopefully some of this money can help us move to solve those types of problems. Even though they are recurring, but they right now in Fairfax County, for example, there are forces beyond the state of competitive forces. We have to pay more just to keep the quality of teachers that we want working here. So there's a couple thoughts.
Thank you, Senator Barker.
All right, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that Delegate Sickles has hit upon, one of our major issues is what we can do for the school systems across Virginia. There is a fair amount of money that is targeted to schools and also higher education things. So I think we are going to be working in both of those areas to try to make sure that we have improve our situations significantly. We actually, in terms of higher education, for the last several years, we have either been number 1 or number 2 in the country in rankings as it relates to the public higher education system that we have in Virginia. And we're going to continue to work to improve that further so that we can hopefully be number 1 all the time. So rather than sort of flipping back and forth between number 1 and number 2. However, on the K-12 end of things, we have some real challenges. And actually, Delegate Sickles talked about the pay for teachers. We actually are last in the nation, 50th out of 50 states in terms of comparison between the salaries that teachers get and what other comparable workers who have comparable jobs, comparable education requirements, et cetera, have. And we are absolutely last in the entire country. And that's even despite the fact that we have much better pay up here in Northern Virginia than we do in other parts of the Commonwealth. And we don't train enough teachers at our higher education institutions to be able to fill all the teaching positions. So we have to recruit people from, and actually Mark Murray just put a chat in along the line of just what I was talking about. Number 50 in the country in terms of what we pay our teachers compared to what other comparably trained employees have in other professions in Virginia. But also what we have is we have to recruit teachers from out of state, graduates from colleges and universities in other states, because we don't train enough to fill all the positions just within our higher education institutions in Virginia. And historically, we've gotten a lot of people from Pennsylvania and New York because they have very well-developed systems training teachers at higher education institutions throughout those two states. And but they're now running into some shortages on their own. So and if you graduate from a higher education institution in Pennsylvania or New York, you can stay local, work in the state that you grew up in, and make much more than you could if you moved to Virginia. So that we're now facing difficulty filling those types of positions. Another major issue that we have is not having as comprehensive and universal system related to pre-kindergarten services. Studies have shown that if that actually lower income students who have socioeconomic challenges within their families actually improve their knowledge at pretty much the same rate every year as the higher income students do. The problem is that when they get to kindergarten, the lower socioeconomic status students are well behind the higher socioeconomic status students at the entry into kindergarten. And so there's a track that they basically make as much progress as the higher income students, but they never eliminate that gap totally. And so that's what we got to do is to get students better prepared by the time they get to kindergarten from a lot of the lower socioeconomic status families. And if we could do that with pre-kindergarten services being more universally available, and we've not used all the money that the state is providing here in Fairfax County and in neighboring Prince William County, there's almost no pre-kindergarten services that are comparable to what you get in other parts of the state. So we have some challenges, and we can address some of these. We clearly will do what we can in the broadband area. We're going to deal with our unemployment system and trying to make sure that we don't shovel a lot of that onto businesses. So we'll try to provide support there. We're going to put more money into protecting the small businesses that have had difficulty throughout the pandemic period with our program that we have that's just a state operated program called Rebuild Virginia that's provide loans and relief dollars to a lot of different entities. And we're going to particularly, I think, focus a lot of effort into the hospitality sector because that's the one in Virginia where there's been by far much more impact there than elsewhere. And then the last thing I think that we've talked about in terms of some planning for that yet, for the special session to deal with these, both the $500 million that we are going to have from our state budget as surplus this fiscal year, and then all the money coming from the federal funds that are there. We're going to try to work on some of the healthcare issues that Delegate Sickles and I have already been working on over the years. So that's sort of what we're going to do. We're probably going to be sometime in the latter half of July or moving into August before we have enough information to be able to figure out where everything can go. So part of what we'll be doing is sort of planning for what we can do to improve things without putting us in a position where we would have to maintain a lot of those expenditures long term. But the other is sort of having a glide path to be able to transition to state resources to continue some of those programs. And we certainly can do that. We're in outstanding shape right now. I'm not sure there's whether there are a few states around the country that have had similar situations to us, but I mean, our revenues for this fiscal year are already up over 12% of what they were last year. And it's probably going to end up being closer to 15%, when originally the expectation was that we were going to go into a decline in revenues. So we're actually, I think our economy has stayed pretty strong throughout the last year. But I think we are very well positioned for the future and moving in the right direction there that will help us be able to do some of these types of things.
That's great to hear. So Holly just asked a question about me potentially using some of the federal funding for undergrounding, in our case, particularly along Route 1. So that'll be a question. I'll turn it over to Senator Sherwood if you want to highlight your legislation from this past year and how that's another tool to help with the undergrounding, and then whether you or one of your colleagues want to pontificate on whether or not we could use that money for that particular project.
Well, Senator Sherwood is Mr. Underground, so we'll let him handle this question here. So
yeah, I'm not Mr. ARPA though, but you and Sickles are the ARPA guys. So the undergrounding thing has been really frustrating for me because we've known about this now for probably 5 years, and Prince William County has 14 miles of Route 1, and that county has paid for undergrounding on every single inch of Route 1 in Prince William County using county money, and county money and state money, by the way. But the Fairfax County Board has just refused to really meaningfully consider it yet. So where it stands right now is that VDOT has offered to put in $15 million towards undergrounding. And Delegate Krizek and I got Verizon to agree to underground their cables for free. That's about a $20 million value. If the county will pay for the duct bank to be built a little bit larger for their wires, it would cost about $5 million to build the duct bank for the power lines a little bit larger. But Verizon said, if you build that duct bank a little bit larger for $5 million, we'll string our wires in, pull our equipment, our switches, and our routers for free. That's a $25 million give. So we've now found about $40 million of money for this, and the county's yet to make any kind of commitment to it. And so 2 years ago, I passed a law that would allow the county to do a $1 tax on every electric meter in the county to raise money to pay for this. But the money had to be spent on Route 1 first. They didn't like that. They asked me to make a bunch of changes to the bill this year, including to allow it to be spent on more than corridors that have transit. The original bill said it had to be spent on corridors that incorporated transit and high density development. I had to do that to get it through the Republican legislature back in 2019. So we took that language out. So now it can be spent on any commercial corridor in the county, the tax revenue. We also clarified the taxing authority. And so now the bill is written, if the county uses the maximum taxing authority, it could raise between $30 and $40 million a year, right? That's between 300 and 400 million a decade. That would fund the Route 1 undergrounding about 5 times. If you bonded it off and raised 600 million through a bonding, you could do undergrounding all throughout Fairfax County. They asked for that. So, and there were some other technical things they asked for. We got in some fights because I felt like the county was trying to negotiate the contract through the statute ahead of time. And I told them a lot of this stuff can be just dealt with in procurement. It doesn't have to be in the code. The code just needs to get broad authority, and then you can figure out the details later. But we're not going to negotiate the I don't want to get in a battle with utilities right now in front of all these committees. And so, but we made most of the changes they asked for, but they still haven't taken any action yet to act on using that taxing authority to pay for undergrounding. One other thing the county did, by the way, is they requested $48 million out of the state budget to pay for Route 1 undergrounding. They put that budget amendment in through Delegate Krizek and I think Senator Evan. And I mean, you heard Delegate Sickles earlier talk about how hard it was just to get $5 million. Just imagine trying to get $48 million for the third wealthiest county in the state to pay for undergrounding. It didn't really fare very well. So hopefully Fairfax County will start to engage on this. I mean, what they told me is they needed some authority that would allow them to sell this to all 10 supervisors and not just Rodney and Stork and Dan Stork. And I've given them what they've asked for now, I think twice, and hopefully they'll act on it. As to ARPA, I haven't seen the ARPA guidance yet. ARPA is the new slug of money that's coming down. And I'm not sure whether ARPA, I know the infrastructure bill, the one that's being batted around, the big infrastructure bill at the federal level, I believe that has to be spent on rehabbing stuff as opposed to new construction, I think. I'm not positive. But I know that I've asked Congressman Beyer if we could apply through that. I don't think he thinks they would be eligible under that, but it might be eligible under ARPA. But George and Mark would be getting those kinds of briefings that I haven't got yet about what ARPA allows and what it doesn't. So, and also the county's getting money directly under ARPA as well. I don't know whether the county money, the money the county's getting to the federal government, be spent on that, but maybe you guys could fill in on that.
Well, just as a philosophy here, everybody wants to go to heaven and nobody wants to die. And I think it fits in that category because the County Board of Supervisors has they can't even make the match yet. Maybe with this new money they can, to give the teachers a 5% pay increase that we provided the state share for. And that's because beyond the standards of quality, Fairfax goes beyond that. So only 20% of the school budget comes from us. And so they need $100 million to make the 5% raise. So there are choices that people have to make in government. And this is just a choice. Do we want to spend it undergrounding utilities, or do we want to give our teachers a raise, or do we want to do many other things that they have to do? Open the new police department or the new police facility in Lorton. The county has different things they have to worry about. It's not just one thing. And so, I wish them luck in trying to figure out how they want to spend their money. That's what they get elected to do. They can criticize us for not spending or not doing this or that, but that's legitimate. And I have sympathy for, the choices that they have to make.
Thank you. Appreciate your insight in that. I know everyone's been more than generous with your time this morning. So if you just want to give some closing thoughts, Delegate Tran, we'll turn it over to you, and then Senator Barker will be next.
I think we've just, I always love hearing from my colleagues and putting in my own plugs for things happening at when we go to appropriations and what we consider. But I think as we look at how we spend our federal resources, I think one of the things I'd like to put a plug in for is just making sure, and particularly because we have such a diverse corridor here, is making sure that we, as much as possible, help to expand language access to our state services. I think that we've recognized some key areas with, for example, the Virginia Employment Commission, information that is so important to so many Virginians right now who are, baby Warren just woke up, who are struggling through the pandemic. And then also with our Virginia Department of Health, making sure that we're getting this critical health information out, is how do we do that in a way where all Virginians are able to access that information that is correct, right? I think some of the translation efforts led by the state this year have relied on Google Translate, and which has not always been very accurate and has been problematic. And so I'd like to just put a pin on that. I think that's really important to our community along the Route 1 corridor, and look forward to this upcoming special session and figuring out how to prioritize the needs that we're seeing in Virginia. But it's always a pleasure to work with this crew.
Thank you.
All right, if you want me to jump in now. My undergraduate degree was in economics and public health. Was a major I came up with myself to combine those two fields, and then got a graduate degree in health policy and management. So the past 15 months have really been up my alley to try to deal with our economic situation and to deal with all the challenges that we've had in the healthcare field, and to be able to try to get the right decisions made at the state level, and to be able to get them implemented at the local level to try to help us through the pandemic we've had here. And we've been up and down. It's not been universally good, it's not been universally bad, but I think we have some opportunities now to really continue to improve our healthcare services and system, to have a much stronger public health system in place. Should there be something like this again, that we're ready for it, much better than we were last February and March, as the pandemic began to weigh over us in Virginia. So I'm going to continue to work on these types of things. We don't have all the guidance yet we need to figure out how to spend the money coming down from the feds. We clearly can figure out how to spend the money that we have, the $500 million that we're going to have as surplus here. So I think we will move fairly aggressively. It's been a little frustrating because initially we thought we would be going back to special session probably in June. But since we don't have the guidance yet, it's probably going to be July, or most likely probably into August before we go back down and are able to make decisions comprehensively for all the categories of funds we're receiving. And what I'm going to continue to work on with Delegate Sickles and others is making sure that we do what we need to do to strengthen and provide the underpinning to our economic system, to do the both short-term and long-term. And some of the long-term is if we get all students ready for kindergarten by the time they're going into kindergarten, we're going to have a much better workforce to deal with, and Delegate Tran's going to have a lot of opportunities to use her skills in that workforce field to make sure that we continue to move aggressively in a positive direction. And we already have shortages of workers, particularly in some of the tech fields and things here in Northern Virginia. And we need to continue to be very intentional and targeted in what we need to do to get those done. And that will help us to then have the resources for good quality of life for the employees and their families and the businesses, and also then be able to deal with have resources that we can use to deal with some of the healthcare challenges and those other types of things that are our responsibility at the public level. So I look forward to continuing to work on it, and I'm optimistic that we're heading in the right direction. We just got to keep running as hard as we can to catch up. So
Thank you. It's good to hear. Delegate Sickles?
I was going to say, I didn't go to Harvard. I barely made it out of Clemson, and I want to help George establish a public health system that works for everybody. We got to do better than we're doing now with our disjointed systems of provision of healthcare. So that's a long-term project. Our biggest economic development issue across the state here in Northern Virginia and elsewhere are related to workforce. And that's a challenge that we have to meet in several different ways that we're working on. The good thing, in a sense, is that every other state has that problem too. So if you solve the workforce challenge, we have a bright future across the state. One of the things that our Economic Development Agency tells us is their biggest single issue, and it doesn't necessarily apply up here much, except that we are financing much of the state, are business-ready sites for business to move into. Just made a big announcement the other day at a site in Pennsylvania County that was perfect, that we stole a company from that is going to go in there. And it's one of the few sites that we have that's ready to go. this is an issue that Washington Gas and Dominion and other utility companies are really big on, because if we have these sites ready to go and strategically located, we can draw the business in manufacturing. We lost an automobile manufacturing proposal recently because we don't have sites that other states have. So something we need to work on. And then we do have two different types of assistance to companies with employee training, and they get to choose when they're coming here which one they have. We have a custom workforce development program they have that we sell. So our EDP is involved in every day in trying to bring major companies to the state, and not just bring them here, but to build, in some cases, what they have here already into something bigger. So I think we have a bright future. Workforce is almost everything with regard to whether we succeed in this or not. So another aspect of what we think about when we want to invest your money going forward.
Excellent, thank you. And with the last word, Senator Servo.
Kevin, thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk to the business community of Mount Vernon today. Find your all's input extremely valuable as we try and figure out how to prioritize resources in our bills. Your input on minimum wage bill a couple of years ago, last session, not this session, one before that, was critical. We just went through the first minimum wage increase. The second one's coming in January. Be curious to hear how that goes from you all after it's implemented. One of the things that, in terms of the future, that I think we all need to focus on is continuing to build in our infrastructure. The widening of Route 1, the construction of bus rapid transit, the extension of the yellow line is going to increasingly drive our local economy in Mount Vernon. We've got about 400 million, I think, maybe 500 million allocated towards that right now. We're still about 300 million, 400 million short. We're hoping to get a slug of that from the feds under the county's New Start grant they just applied for. We're going to need some more from the state. The Long Bridge, once that Long Bridge is built, that's going to really jumpstart things up and down the I-95 corridor. I think Amazon right now, I thought I heard on the news yesterday, they've got 2,000 job openings right now up at HQ2. When we cut that deal with them, when Terry McAuliffe cut that deal with them, I think the minimum salary they're required to pay is $125,000. You're going to see, a lot of those people who work at that facility are going to live down in our community, and there's going to be businesses that support that facility that are going to be located up and down the I-95 corridor, including in the Mount Vernon corridor, and we need to do all we can to compete for that. I think the construction of this transit line that we're putting in is going to allow us to really build a strong and resilient business community in Mount Vernon. So those two projects, the Long Bridge and the getting the Route 1 construction started and funded are two of my biggest priorities in terms of our long term here in Mount Vernon. But I know as we go forward, I'm a little worried about the economy, to be honest. I think right now our economy is on a sugar high. There's a lot of government spending that's driving a lot of what's going on right now. I'm not sure there's a lot of solid economic fundamentals that underlie what's happening. The housing market is right now increasing at an unsustainable pace. The professionals say it's not quite bubble levels yet, but when you put this kind of money into an economy, the sugar high tends to also create a sugar crash, is what the economists have told us in the past. And so, I tend to be a little cautious about sort of where things are going, but our areas tended to be a little more insulated from national economic trends because of the amount of government spending that we have around here. So that's something on the good side, but we have to look out for the whole state. That's not the case in Southwest, Southside. Hampton Roads can sometimes be impacted as well if the defense spending doesn't keep up. So, I think we have to be careful and prudent as we budget to make sure that we don't overcommit because the next crash is coming. I don't know when, but hopefully Putin doesn't invade or Kim Jong-il doesn't shoot off a missile or the housing market doesn't crash or we have another pandemic or that virus mutates and creates something even worse. So it's exciting to have all this money to spend, but we do need to be careful and keep the input and the feedback coming. I appreciate that.
Can I add something real quick to what Senator Serbell said? On this infrastructure bill the feds are considering now, I believe one of the biggest projects ought to be the second tunnel under the Potomac River, between Roslyn and Foggy Bottom, because it is limiting the headway times on the Blue Line. All Blue Line their Blue Line can never expand its capacity until that second tunnel is built. Seems funny, it's over in Arlington, but it constrains the Blue Line, and I have a lot of Blue Line riders on my side. Assuming we go back to going to offices to work in the same way we did, we need that tunnel to enhance the whole 106-mile metro system that we have now. Thanks.
Thank you for adding that. And again, I appreciate how generous all of you have been with your time. And as I said at the beginning, we are lucky to have such an effective and influential representation in Richmond. So with that, I'll turn it over to our chair, Mark Murray.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Thank you to our elected officials. We really appreciate the time. I know it's a crunch for you guys to get out and get to us, but it's very great that you joined us this morning, and I hope everybody was able to take something away from it. So that concludes our program today. Remember that in June, the June morning briefing will feature the National Museum of the United States Army. Again, thank you, Delegate Sickles, for that plug, and we look forward to seeing each of you then, and we hope everybody has a really good day.